myself, what is going on here? The third interview, I talked to the producer and I said to him, I just asked him, I said, why in the world would French people want to care about an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico? Why would they send you across the Atlantic to come to Dauphin Island and report on this? He said, that's a very good question. 20 years ago, in the Mediterranean, an oil spill blew up and the oils covered the French Riviera in the fall of the year when they all take vacation. That was the impetus for France to shift their productivity and their energy supply from oil to nuclear. Right now, France is the largest nuclear generator in the world. 70% of all their power is generated through nuclear power plants, and France has the best technology. They don't stick those used rods in the ground for 10 million years, 100 million years. They have a method of actually recycling those rods, and in 15 to 20 years, they reuse the rods. And that technology is actually being adopted, and you'll find this interesting. The next power plant, nuclear power plant built in the United States will be built by, and some of you probably own stock in this company, by Southern Company. They have the newest permit to build a nuclear power plant. Now, it's going to take, it's going to take a long time for that to take place. They normally take about 20 years to go online. I'm sure there's new methods, but they're going to start looking at the French design. Next slide, please. Well, everybody's concerned about animals. We talk about shrimp and crabs and finfish and oysters and all. And I like to talk about those animals in this aspect. Animals are resistant. Coastal marine animals are resistant. And the reason I say that is they're not resistant to the oil, but they're resilient in their capacity for reproduction. A blue crab, a female blue crab, when she lays eggs, she lays 6 million eggs. So if all the blue crabs in the North Gulf of Mexico, off of Panhandle of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and if all of them died, the blue crabs from Florida and Texas and Mexico will proliferate the entire Gulf of Mexico and we'll have blue crabs because they lay that many eggs. Now, 1% of that 6 million become adults, but they are very resilient in that capacity of their reproductive capacity. All of us here and during political years, fish fries are a primary attractant to get people to come and to listen to your message. And the mullet is a primary source, and we have the mullet in the Gulf Coast. That fish, the female leaves in the fall and carries 8 million eggs. So that's just an example of what we're talking about. But the habitats do not bounce back. They don't bounce back at the same speed. It takes years, 25, 50, 100 years for impacted habitats to come back. Whether it's a beach habitat, a grass bed that we have here, salt marsh habitats, or oysters, they don't bounce back. That's the big concern, is the habitats and the potential impact of the oil and dispersant in the habitat. Next slide, please. This is a 3D representation of the Gulf of Mexico. And I just wanted you to see, in relationship to depth, you'll see the really dark blue is the deepest parts of the Gulf of Mexico. The star is where the Deep Horizon was, and that's 5,000 feet. And please, don't think that that's the only well drilling at 5,000 feet. There are multitude, well, right now, in and around Deep Horizon are 4 other wells, besides the one they're drilling right now, that are at 5,000 feet. This is just one. And drilling at 5,000 feet is nothing new. In the North Sea, they drill at 10,000 feet. There's a new well going in that they're projected to drill at 12,000 feet. So the technology to drill at that depth is there. What was lacking in this situation was oversight. not the technology. The technology is there. And I think that's been demonstrated to you with these two wells that are being drilled, and you can actually, and I'll show you an image here shortly, you can actually see which direction the wells can go. This is to get to understand our reference and our research. The Dauphin Island Sealab's been in existence since 1970, located on the east end of Dauphin Island. We employ 122 people. There's 12 PhD scientists, 52 full-time graduate students there all the time. We have been doing research since 1970. We've been doing research out on the shelf. We've been doing research in Mobile Bay, up into the grass beds, the oyster reefs, and around the world. I've had projects in the Yucatan in Mexico. We have one of our scientists right now is in Spain, doing work in Spain. So we have been here that long. We have long-term databases. We know what lives in our waters. We don't study the middle of the Gulf of Mexico at 5,000 feet, but we study from 300 feet all the way into the river systems and up the river systems. And we have that database, and that database is there. So if someone came out and said, well, I don't think this organism was there, before the spill, and you know who that someone will be when we get into lawsuits, we can just pull the database out. Well, wait 1 minute, here's this study that showed exactly what was here on this date. But just to make sure and follow that up, we started sampling 2 days after the spill. And we sampled every single day for 3 weeks. Our boats, all of our boats, were gone every single day, just so we could say 2 days after the spill, and for the next 3 weeks, here's the data that shows what was there, because we had no oil then. Next slide, please. This is just some instrumentation that we use to monitor some of these sites, inshore and offshore. Next slide, please. One of the interesting aspects that we do is we sample the water column for microscopic organisms. All right, and this is a type of a net that samples. Can you move to the next slide, Laurie, please? And this net is computer programmed. We use it off the back of our boat, and we send it down, and you see that first diagonal line. The net's taking a sample on the way down to whatever depth we send it to. We might program it for 200 feet. So on 200 feet going down, it's picking up everything that's in the water column. The net closes, the next net, the instrument comes up, and the next net works at a different water level, and then a different. So we have discrete samples throughout the entire water. We can tell you what lived at 100 feet, 50 feet, 25 feet, 10 feet. We know what's there, and we know what's there. We've been doing this for 7 years. We know what's there seasonally. We know what's there by temperature change. We know what's there by salinity change. Next slide. This is some more instrumentation that we use. Next slide, please. This is a comparison. We wanted to show people that we are out there. And so this is a comparison between a sample taken in 2009, 2010, exact same time frame. And this is just by volume. I'm not going to sit here and tell you who's in that collection. But if you look at the volume in the jars, they're about equal. And basically that's telling you that we haven't seen a change. We did not in June see a change in our sampling stations, and this is 32 miles offshore. We didn't see a change in our sampling at that time. Next slide, please. Well, this is a very interesting study. One of our scientists, Dr. Monty Graham, doesn't live too far from here, had his oceanography students send out these little drifters that actually connected to a satellite, a NOAA satellite, and we monitored and followed those little drifters. And I'm going to show you how that happened. Watch slowly in the upper right, your left, you'll see the date changing. This is the oil. This is the actual movement of the oil as seen by satellites. And very shortly, up in that corner, those are drifters. Those little circles up there, right there. Those are drifters that we put out. And you should notice something, that those drifters are staying in a circle. The circle is called a gyre. That's what happens in the ocean out there this time of year. These circular patterns take place, and these gyres circulate. And there's not a big change in that drifting.